Summary of The Bell Jar. A Young Woman's Experience with Mental Illness and Recovery, by Sylvia Plath, written and narrated by Janky Mind. Introduction. The narrative of The Bell Jar centers around Esther Greenwood, a prodigiously skilled young woman who attains a coveted internship at a prominent New York fashion magazine during the summer of 1953. However, Esther becomes ensnared by the constricting gender norms and societal expectations of that era. Subsequently, she descends into a profound melancholy from which liberation appears elusive. The uniqueness of The Bell Jar extends beyond being the singular novel penned by Sylvia Plath. Its distinctiveness is further rooted in its temporal proximity to the tragic demise of Plath, being published merely a month prior. The novel draws profound inspiration from the life of its creator. Esther Greenwood, the central protagonist, emerges as an accomplished young writer, securing an internship with a distinguished New York fashion magazine. Yet, despite her utmost endeavors, she finds herself adrift in the vast metropolis, unable to conform to the confining gender norms prevalent during her time. The Bell Jar's candid exploration of societal conventions and mental well-being was nothing short of revolutionary during its inception. The tale persists as a contemporary exemplar of literary excellence, an assertion expounded upon in the ensuing audiobook presentation. A brief forewarning before we embark: this audiobook contains depictions of sensitive topics including sexual violence, depression, and suicide. Therefore, it is advisable to approach with sensitivity. For a succinct overview, feel free to navigate to the concluding section. Chapter 1: An Unconventional and Enigmatic Summer in New York. The summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs. It was an unusual, sultry season, and my purpose in New York eluded me. With these evocative words, The Bell Jar embarks on its narrative journey, with Esther Greenwood as our guide. Esther, a gifted young writer, finds herself in New York City during the summer of 1953. Her presence is attributed to a prestigious internship won by her and 11 other young women at the revered fashion magazine, Ladies' Day. For a budding poet from the outskirts of Boston, this opportunity should be a thrilling one. However, the excitement eludes Esther, setting the tone for her complex experiences to come. The camaraderie among her peers only accentuates Esther's sense of isolation. Despite her fellow interns appearing poised and self-assured, Esther feels increasingly estranged from them. Doreen, a jaded socialite with a penchant for revelry over academia, both captivates and repels Esther. An impulsive evening out with Doreen leads to a desolate night spent alone in her hotel room, a stark contrast to the apparent excitement. Doreen's subsequent nocturnal intrusion prompts Esther to seek solace elsewhere, particularly with Betsy. Betsy is Doreen's antithesis, a virtuous, ebullient Midwesterner. Although Betsy extends her friendship, Esther hesitates to reciprocate, ensnared by her own ambivalence. Amidst the glamorous backdrop of lavish gifts and extravagant dinners facilitated by the magazine, a bout of food poisoning reshuffles the dynamics. Doreen unexpectedly takes on a caretaker role, nursing Esther back to health, a twist that adds depth to their intricate interactions. These initial chapters of The Bell Jar delve into Esther's internal battles and her intricate relationship with her surroundings. The narrative closely mirrors Sylvia Plath's own experiences during her undergraduate years in 1953, where she secured a chance to guest edit for Mademoiselle, a New York fashion magazine. Plath leverages this personal background to vividly depict the city's vibrancy, its inhabitants, and the world of fashion. The recurrent theme of fashion as a mask symbolizes Esther's quest for self-identity, a theme further underscored by her contrast to Doreen and Betsy. Unlike Doreen's world-weary allure or Betsy's unsullied charm, Esther struggles to align herself with the prescribed female roles of her era, amplifying her emotional ambivalence toward the two. In her pursuit of self-discovery, Esther often resorts to fabrication, like adopting the alias Ellie Higginbottom from Chicago when approached by flirtatious men. Esther's growing detachment poses an increasingly formidable challenge as the novel progresses. Her fixation on the Rosenbergs, executed for treason in a peacetime precedent, foreshadows her burgeoning preoccupation with mortality, marking a significant thematic trajectory. Chapter 2, Buddy Willard, A Portrait of Hypocrisy. During her recuperation from the bout of food poisoning, Esther receives an unexpected call from Constantine, a blind date arranged for her, working as a UN interpreter. Her initial interaction with Constantine elicits a sense of irritation, his demeanor reminding her uncomfortably of Buddy Willard, a former romantic interest. Despite her reservations, she consents to a date with Constantine, leading them to the United Nations, followed by a dinner engagement and a visit to his apartment. In an attempt to retaliate against Buddy, Esther entertains the idea of allowing Constantine to seduce her. However, her scheme unravels as Constantine fails to seize the opportunity, leaving Esther grappling once more with feelings of isolation and despondency in her solitary hotel room. This solitude prompts a period of introspection, during which she contemplates her complex history with Buddy. Esther's infatuation with Buddy had spanned years prior to their romantic involvement. Yet, paradoxically, her fascination diminished soon after they embarked on their relationship. This alteration in sentiment arose from revelations about Buddy's past romantic entanglements, including an association with her fellow classmate, Joan. Esther's disillusionment deepened during a visit to Yale Medical School, where she partook in morbid tasks such as dissecting cadavers and assisting in childbirth alongside Buddy. It was then that she learned of his sexual history with another woman, an incongruity that Esther saw as emblematic of pervasive male hypocrisy of the era, demanding purity from women while indulging in promiscuity themselves. The turmoil of this revelation was compounded by Buddy's contraction of tuberculosis, which confined him to a sanatorium. Esther remained by his side out of both compassion and the desire to avoid the complexities of ending the relationship. However, Buddy disregarded her internal struggles and proposed marriage during a visit, an offer met with Esther's resolute rejection, driven by her aversion to the institution. Memories of a ski trip further underscore Esther's embittered recollections of Buddy. His manipulation coerced her into a hazardous descent, resulting in a broken leg. Adding to the strain was Buddy's dismissive attitude toward Esther's poetic aspirations, exemplified by his analogy of a poem as a mere speck of dust. This narrative segment delves into Esther's encounters with men, illuminating her difficulty in forming authentic connections amidst the discord between societal expectations and personal desires. The theme of patriarchal double standards becomes prominent, as Buddy epitomizes the hypocrisy of demanding purity from women while engaging in promiscuity himself. Additionally, Buddy's belittlement of Esther's literary ambitions underscores her apprehensions about conventional roles of marriage and motherhood. Ironically mirroring Esther's experiences, Sylvia Plath herself confronted tumultuous relationships with men. Her marriage to British poet Ted Hughes in 1956 eventually unveiled infidelity and abusive dynamics, culminating in their separation in 1962, a mere year preceding Plath's tragic demise. Chapter 3, Unearthing a Gem Amidst Turmoil. The culmination of Esther's month-long internship in New York arrives, marked by a poignant photoshoot orchestrated by the magazine. Each intern is tasked with symbolizing their aspirations through an object. Esther, plagued by uncertainty about her future, struggles to choose a representative item. JC, her supervisor, eventually bestows upon her a paper rose to embody her poetical ambitions. However, as the camera captures her image, a wave of emotion overtakes her, leading to tears. On her final night in the city, Esther embarks on another blind date arranged by Doreen, this time with a Peruvian man named Marco. The evening initially holds promise as Marco presents her with a diamond stick pin. Yet, the date takes a harrowing turn as Marco coerces Esther into dancing and subsequently assaults her outside, leaving her dress torn and her spirit shattered.
A surge of resilience empowers Esther to fend off her attacker, leaving Marco in ignominy.
Returning to her lodgings, Esther ascends to the rooftop and discards her opulent attire into the abyss below, likening the act to bidding farewell to aspects of herself. The passage of her clothing into the night wind mirrors the dispersion of her self-identities she'd experimented with during her stay in the city. She departs for home wearing borrowed garments, remnants of her traumatic encounter still etched upon her cheek. Her return is met with the disheartening news of her rejection from a summer writing program, compounding her distress. Despite her imaginative aspirations for the season, Esther finds herself ensnared in the mundane confines of suburban life, her depression deepening. Sleep, appetite, and the pleasure of reading all elude her grasp as she grapples with a morbid preoccupation with mortality. Her mother's inability to provide substantial support or understanding further exacerbates her sense of isolation. Amid this turmoil, a family physician discerns the gravity of Esther's mental state, recognizing the necessity of professional intervention. Strikingly, Esther narrates her experience of sexual assault with a detached and impassive tone, as if it were merely another chapter in a succession of disappointments. The diamond stickpin gifted by Marco symbolizes the allure of conformity to societal norms, holding the promise of an idyllic existence if she adhered to the expectations of men. Yet, Esther refuses to succumb, metaphorically shedding her adopted facades and embracing her authenticity. In a paradoxical twist, her exit from New York bears an air of anticipation, signifying her liberation from the city's confines. However, the solace she seeks eludes her grasp upon her return to the suburbs, leaving her adrift in a sea of alienation and ennui. Esther's deteriorating mental state, though urgently dire, is met with condescension and misunderstanding rather than empathy from her surroundings, except for the perceptive family doctor who recommends professional intervention.
Chapter 4: Within the Current's Embrace.
In a sweeping progression, we delve into Esther's encounters with psychiatrist Dr. Gordon, where her aspiration for a clarifying diagnosis of her affliction takes root.
During this phase, she displays profound signs of desolation, encompassing insomnia, neglect of personal hygiene, and an unsettling obsession with mortality.
Esther's initial impression of the sophisticated Dr. Gordon is far from favorable, yet her own vulnerability prevents her from asserting herself. Following her second appointment, Dr. Gordon introduces the idea of outpatient electroshock treatments, to which Esther reluctantly consents.
The treatments unfold as a series of tormenting ordeals.
Amidst her inaugural session, Esther confronts her destiny with a pondering on the gravity of her transgressions. I questioned the enormity of my perceived wrongdoing.
In the wake of ongoing treatments, Esther's narration morphs into a surreal and disjointed fabric.
She appears to oscillate between states of awareness and unconsciousness.
The notion of escaping takes root within her.
She briefly endeavors to volunteer at a hospital but promptly abandons the endeavor. Collecting insights from dialogues and news clippings, she embarks on an exploration of various methods of self-demise.
Gradually, these contemplations evolve into timid actions aligning with her suicidal musings.
During a beach outing with her longtime friend Jody, she ventures into the depths of the water. Within her home, she attempts to asphyxiate herself using her mother's bed frame.
In a vulnerable moment within her bathtub, she explores the sensation of laceration with razors.
As the narrative advances, she senses readiness for a resolute endeavor. Locking herself within a cellar crawlspace, she consumes a full vial of sleeping pills. As the medication's effects take hold, a kaleidoscope of red and blue lights dance before her eyes. Succumbing to unconsciousness, Esther perceives herself being carried away by an immense tide. While a glimmer of optimism arises as Esther reaches out for professional intervention, Dr. Gordon's unrelenting methodologies only amplify her profound despondency. Death becomes an increasingly conceivable remedy for her internal anguish.
Much like Esther, Plath embarked on her initial suicide endeavor at the tender age of 20, with subsequent attempts following suit.
In her renowned poem Lady Lazarus, she illustrates the notion of undergoing death repeatedly, akin to a feline's resiliency. Esther's dispassionate portrayal of her suicide trials stands as one of the most emotionally wrenching facets of the bell jar, particularly when juxtaposed with Plath's own demise attributed to sleeping pills, occurring merely a month after the novel's publication.
Chapter 5, Encased in the Bell Jar. Awakening in a shroud of darkness, Esther finds herself adrift in a sea of confusion, robbed of her sight. The terror of permanent blindness grips her, yet reassurance arrives through the doctor's words, promising her eventual recovery. Despite the passage of time, her mental anguish remains unyielding.
Confronted with her own disfigured visage, she shatters the hospital mirror, an act that seals her fate for transfer to a specialized ward catering to volatile patients within a state medical institution.
Amid this peculiar backdrop of patient-staff interactions, Esther discovers a streak of irony, a fleeting respite from her turmoil. Yet, her resistance to the therapeutic endeavors of the medical practitioners persists. A savior emerges in the person of Philomena Guinea, the affluent patron responsible for Esther's educational scholarship. Touched by concern for Esther's well-being, Philomena orchestrates her relocation to a private psychiatric facility. During the journey to this haven, Esther engages in introspection, likening her depression to an ever-present glass bell jar, encapsulating her in an oppressive atmosphere even in the most picturesque of locales. Within the sanctuary of the private institution, Esther forges an affinity for Dr. Nolan, a female luminary steering the hospital's course. This juncture ushers in insulin shock therapy, a prevalent psychiatric intervention of the 1950s involving induced comas through insulin injections. These sessions plunge Esther into a world of disorientation and the struggle of unwanted weight gain. Joan, a former paramour of Buddy's and a fellow classmate, materializes in the hospital, catching Esther off guard. Mirroring Esther's harrowing experience, Joan confesses her own suicide attempt and shares press clippings that immortalize Esther's dramatic plunge. An alliance blooms between the two, but as always, Joan's enthusiasm for the connection outshines Esther's own sentiments. An unsettling revelation from Joan hints at romantic inclinations, a declaration met with repulsion as Esther recoils. In due course, Esther and Joan ascend to the Belsize facility, an opulent enclave boasting lenient restrictions. The price for Esther's advancement entails enduring another round of electroshock therapy. While betrayal taints her relationship with Dr. Nolan, the electroshock treatments appear less malevolent than before. Taking advantage of her town privileges, Esther seeks solace in a gynecologist's counsel and procures a diaphragm. This narrative segment unveils the inadequacies of 1950s psychiatric care, wherein a parade of elaborate interventions barely scratches the surface of Esther's underlying tribulations. These efforts aim to quell symptoms and shape her into societal conventions, yet the female influences orbiting Esther, including Philomena Guinea and Dr. Nolan, fall short in guiding her beyond the confines of societal expectations. This chapter resonates with Sylvia Plath's own encounters within the psychiatric realm. After her initial suicide endeavor, Plath's journey led her to institutions marked by electric and insulin shock treatments. Though temporary relief seemed attainable, Plath continued to grapple with severe bouts of depression throughout her life, a reflection mirrored in this poignant narrative. Chapter 6, Captive and Freed. The rift in Esther's relationship with Joan deepens as Joan secures an apartment through one of the nurses while Esther remains confined to the hospital, awaiting the start of her college's winter term. Seeking a distraction, she pays a visit to Erwin, a recent acquaintance who is a mathematics professor. Determined to shed her virginity, she decides to engage in a sexual encounter with him, employing her newly acquired diaphragm. This endeavor, however, proves excruciatingly painful. The episode leads to significant bleeding, forcing Erwin to drive her to Joan's apartment. Subsequently, the nurse cohabiting with Joan escorts Esther to the emergency room. According to the doctor, the kind of hemorrhage Esther endured is an extraordinarily rare event.
Not long after this ordeal, Esther discovers that Joan has taken her own life near a frozen pond. Buddy comes to visit Esther during her hospital stay, grappling with the notion that he might possess some inexplicable allure that drives women to madness. Esther assures him that Joan's suicide had nothing to do with him. During Joan's funeral, Esther finds herself affirming her own existence. I took a deep breath and listened to the old brag of my heart. I am. The conclusion of the bell jar finds Esther flipping through magazines, anticipating her interview that will determine her release from the hospital. Dr. Nolan arrives to escort her, and Esther steps into an uncertain future imbued with newfound hope. This concluding segment portrays Esther as finally attaining a degree of stability as she embraces the path towards normalcy advocated by Dr. Nolan. This new direction offers her the chance for sexual liberation, manifested in her use of contraception and her loss of virginity. Her liaison with Irwin becomes a method for asserting control over her own sexuality and rebelling against societal norms, even if it necessitates a painful sacrifice. Joan's suicide becomes a symbol for Esther's own symbolic death. In an unusual manner, it serves as a form of catharsis for her own internal anguish. As Esther enters the interview room, a sense of potential emancipation lingers. Yet, wholeheartedly believing in her remarkable transformation is challenging. Given the manner of Plath's own life ending, Esther's relief might only be fleeting. Although she now possesses more options, she remains constrained by the expectations and demands of a prescriptive, patriarchal society. Faced with the pressures of her time, the outcome of Esther's struggle remains uncertain. Summary. Set against the backdrop of the 1950s, the narrative revolves around Esther Greenwood, a gifted young woman whose journey takes a harrowing turn into the depths of mental turmoil. While interning at a New York fashion magazine during the summer, Esther becomes embroiled in a profound struggle with her sense of self, the weight of societal expectations, and the confines imposed by gender norms. Immersed in this setting, Esther discovers herself ensnared within a metaphorical bell jar, a symbol of her isolation from the external world, her confrontations with questions of existence, and the gender-based pressures that besiege her. Following a suicide attempt, she finds herself under the care of psychiatric professionals, subjected to a series of experimental treatments aimed at her recovery. Over time, Esther manages to attain a semblance of stability and gradually embraces the path to conformity outlined by her psychiatrist. However, her recuperation remains delicate, as the symbolic bell jar not only reflects the contours of her depression but also encapsulates the constraints imposed upon her by the conformist society of the era. This audiobook summary was brought to you by Janky Mind. We hope you enjoyed it.